He was sure this day would be just like any other, until two cops decided his car was too nice for a black guy. But when they get arrested and forced to answer for their racist bullshit, they won't even realize that their personal hell is just beginning. What happens next? Definitely not what they expected. Samuel Johnson, 46, was a successful black businessman and a former military officer. That evening, he was cruising through the city in his silver BMW X6. The street was empty, the sun dipping low in the sky, painting everything in a warm orange glow. He wasn't thinking much, just another evening ride home, nothing unusual. That is, until the blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror. He pulled over, confused but calm. He'd been stopped before too many times, but something about this felt different. Two white officers approached his car. One was stocky with a buzz cut, the other was younger, leaning lazily against the side of his cruiser. The older officer knocked on the window. "Where are your papers?" Samuel blinked. "What's the problem, officer?" he asked, keeping his voice steady as he rolled the window down. His mind was racing. He had all his documents, no issues there. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he stared at Samuel, his expression sour. The younger cop smirked. "What the hell are you doing driving around in a car like this, huh?" he sneered, looking him up and down. "What, you think you're special?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "This is my car. I can show you the papers if you want." The second cop snorted. "Yeah, right. You? A black guy driving a fancy car like that? I don't buy it." Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd heard it all before. The way people assumed because of his skin color that he didn't belong in certain spaces. But this felt different. The disrespect in the officer's voice was unmistakable. "It's mine," Samuel said, his voice cool but firm. "You want to check the papers? Go ahead." The first cop leaned in closer, peering through the window with a judgmental look. "We'll check it out," he said, his words dripping with suspicion. "You sure you didn't steal this thing?" Samuel stared at him, disbelief sinking in. "You think I stole my own car?" His voice shook with a mix of anger and confusion. This was absurd. The second cop crossed his arms. "You're just some thug with money you can't explain. I'm sure you didn't buy it legally." They weren't even pretending to follow the law now. It wasn't about a car, it wasn't even about the paperwork, it was about control, and Samuel knew it. "I've done nothing wrong," Samuel said, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. "I'm just going home. What's the real problem here?" "Yeah, you're going with us," the first cop said, his tone final. He grabbed his cuffs, moving toward Samuel. "You're under arrest for suspicion of stealing this car." Samuel's heart raced. "What? For what? I didn't steal anything." The second cop shoved him toward the back of the patrol car. "Maybe a night in jail will teach you some respect." Samuel's mind was spinning. He was being arrested simply for existing in a body that these men didn't understand, for driving a car they thought he couldn't afford. He could feel the weight of his anger building, but he kept it under control. He knew they wouldn't listen. The ride to the station was tense, each moment stretching out, filled with the sound of his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. He couldn't believe this was happening. Not again, but he wasn't going to take it lying down. Samuel had been through worse before. He'd been through battles that tested his limits. But this felt different. He wasn't some kid on the street. He wasn't some criminal. He was a man who'd built his life from the ground up. And these two cops had no idea who they were messing with. They arrived at the station, and the officers shoved him into a holding cell. They laughed among themselves, oblivious to the consequences of their actions. Samuel wasn't listening to them. His mind was already on the next step. He was calm, but inside, a plan was forming. He wasn't just going to sit there and take this. They could arrest him, humiliate him, but they weren't going to break him. Samuel had a few tricks up his sleeve, and this was far from over. The next day, Samuel Johnson wasn't just another guy heading to court. He wasn't just the victim of two bad cops anymore. Today, he was the man who would decide their fate. He'd always known the system wasn't built for him, but now he was part of the system, holding the gavel that would swing justice. His lawyer had already filed a lawsuit against the officers for racial profiling and abuse of power. The court date had come up fast, but Samuel wasn't some businessman showing up to plead for his rights. No, today, Samuel was the Chief Justice. He was about to show these officers just how wrong they had been. As Samuel walked into the courthouse, the weight of what was happening pressed down on him. This wasn't just any courthouse. This was where lives changed. Today, Samuel would show them all that his life, his rights, meant something. And those cops? They were about to learn just how much it meant. He entered the courtroom, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. He didn't care about the whispers or the stares. The officers, however, were nervous, shifting uncomfortably as they walked in. They hadn't expected this. They thought today would be just another easy win for them. But then they saw Samuel behind the judge's desk. Excuse me, who are you?" one of the officers asked, his voice faltering. Samuel stood tall, his voice calm but firm. "I'm Samuel Johnson, your judge for the day, and I'll be the one deciding your fate." The officers froze. They had no idea what was happening. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Here was the man they'd wronged, the man they'd harassed, the man they'd humiliated, and now he was the one who would decide if their careers ended today. The younger officer stammered, You can't be the judge, we didn't—" Samuel didn't let him finish. "You didn't think I'd be the one holding the gavel, huh? You thought you could walk all over me because of the color of my skin? Well, today, you're gonna learn just how wrong you were." The room was heavy with tension. The officers exchanged worried glances, their bravado slipping away. Samuel's words cut through the air like a knife, sharp and unforgiving. "You think this is some kind of joke?" Samuel continued. "That I'm just some guy you can bully? You're gonna regret what you did. You're gonna regret looking at me and assuming you could get away with it. But I'm not just any citizen. I'm your judge, and today, I'm handing down justice." The older officer tried to recover, his voice shaky. "We didn't mean to—" "Save it," Samuel interrupted, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not here for your excuses. I'm here for you to pay for what you did." There was no more bravado. The officers stood silent, their faces pale. They realized too late that their world was crumbling around them. This wasn't a courtroom where they'd get away with their usual tactics. Today, Samuel held the power. Today, Samuel was in control. "Listen to me," Samuel said, his voice steady. "You didn't just mess with me, you messed with every person like me who's had to face this system. You thought because I'm black, you could humiliate me, throw me in jail for no reason. You thought that'd be the end of it. But now it's my turn and I'm making sure you're held accountable." The younger officer's hands were trembling now. He had no answer. The weight of the situation was sinking in. They had underestimated Samuel, and now they were paying the price. The silence in the room was deafening. Journalists scribbled notes, their pens moving quickly as they realized they were witnessing something historic. This wasn't just a case of police misconduct. This was a turning point. Finally, Samuel spoke again, his voice resolute. "You crossed the line. You've broken the trust that's supposed to exist between the police and the people they're meant to protect. And now, you're going to face the consequences." The officers had nothing left to say. They stood there, defeated, knowing that their careers, their freedom could be over because of their actions. Samuel looked around the room, his eyes locking with those of the journalists who were witnessing this moment. He wasn't just speaking to the officers anymore. He was speaking to the system, to everyone who had ever been told that their lives didn't matter. Today, it wasn't just about him. It was about justice. The officers sat down, their heads bowed in defeat. They knew their fate was sealed. The courtroom wasn't just Samuel's arena, it was his victory, a victory for everyone who had ever been wronged by the system. Samuel stood there, his eyes cold as the officers stammered through their excuses. They claimed they were just doing their jobs, but Samuel knew better. This wasn't about doing a job. This was about his rights being violated, his life threatened, and their assumption that they could get away with it simply because of who he was. He didn't need to say much. The evidence spoke for itself. Surveillance footage, witness testimonies, internal investigation reports, it was all there, undeniable and damning. These officers had lied, thinking their badges would protect them from the consequences. But today, they were wrong. The room fell silent as Samuel stood up, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I don't care about your excuses," he said, his tone unwavering. "You broke the law, you violated my rights, you thought you could get away with it because of what I look like, but today you're going to pay for it." The officers looked stunned, their confidence shattered. They had expected this to be a simple, quick case, but they hadn't anticipated facing a judge who knew how to fight back. Samuel's presence was unshakable. The air in the room thickened, and the journalists in the back began scribbling notes, cameras flashing. "I'm issuing your arrest," Samuel continued, "for abuse of power, racial discrimination, violation of human rights. You're going to jail for a long time." The officers stood frozen, their faces draining of color. They tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. They were no longer in control. The tables had turned. Samuel's decision was final. As the officers were led away in handcuffs, the reporters' flashes were blinding. Samuel stood tall, his expression hard but resolute. He wasn't just any judge today. He was the embodiment of justice, the man who'd stood up against a broken system and made sure the law was upheld, regardless of the badge someone wore. The news spread like wildfire. By the evening, Samuel's name was on every news station. He was hailed as a hero, a man who had done what so many others were afraid to do. His case became the focal point of conversations across the nation, and social media exploded with messages of support. People weren't just celebrating Samuel's victory over the officers, they were celebrating something bigger. They were celebrating justice. They were celebrating the idea that no one, no matter their position, was above the law. For the first time in a long while, people felt hopeful that change could actually happen. But Samuel knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. He understood the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. The system was deeply rooted, and pushing it to change would take time and effort. But today had shown him something important, that one person could make a difference, that standing up for what's right could lead to real change. As he left the courthouse, the weight of the moment settled on him. He had done something big, something that would be remembered. But this wasn't about personal glory, it was about setting a precedent, about showing the world that justice, even in the face of adversity, could prevail. Samuel had done what needed to be done. He had taken a stand, and in that stand he had reminded the country that the fight for equality and justice was far from over, and he was ready for whatever came next. What would you have done in Samuel's shoes? Do you think he handled the situation right? Let us know your thoughts, share any similar experiences, or maybe someone you know has faced something like this. Like, comment, and tell us how you feel about the story. Your feedback matters. This story was created to raise awareness of the ongoing social issues we all need to confront. It's not just about the conflict, it's about working towards a fairer, more just world. Your voice can make a difference, and together, we can create change.